everyone. It's Russ and Greg with you. Welcome to DIY for Business. Greg, how's it going?
It's going well. Hey, this time I'm actually not in my normal studio. Usually you've kind of
I
been
know,
bouncing
right? I'm
around to
like
different
hopping
offices.
around to different places. I watched our podcast that just went out. Well, okay, so we don't
Right.
record these the same day that they come out. I mean, come on, people. Back at the end of February, I listened to that podcast. What's kind of fun is I watched it on YouTube, and
Uh-huh.
now it's like all these other business podcasts are coming up too.
Uh-huh.
So if it's not for enjoyment of our podcast and you just want a bunch of business podcasts, subscribe to us on YouTube and you get all this other cool stuff.
You
Like
get the
I found
great
so many cool
suggestions.
podcasts. Not saying
Absolutely.
anything bad about ours, but I'm saying that there's a lot of great ones out there.
Just
And
start with ours. Start with ours
exactly.
and
Start
kind of
with ours. It's
and
a
always come
it's
back.
a
And always come back.
exactly. And just make sure you just watch every episode and you're good.
Yeah.
The other thing that came up, which was interesting, was the pickleball podcast.
Okay.
I,
Yeah.
I don't know how that was wired together because I had actually not followed yet on that particular account that I was
Okay.
watching with, and so now we got another subscriber over there. But it was kind of interesting that came up. It figured it out. It's the
It's
amazing
pretty cool.
algorithms.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of makes it kind of scary at the same time, but it'll figure you out. All your connections, what you do at work, what you do for fun, it's amazing. What you say in the room two doors down, it kind of, yeah,
It's
don't know.
it's tracking. It's
Yeah,
tracking you.
it is absolutely.
So the podcast that I listened to, though, I totally distracted myself. I went down this other route of algorithms, but that's what I do these days. But I was listening to it was the one about remote work and
Uh-huh.
creating like the culture around remote work. And fortunately, Beeswax, the company that I'm with, they've since '96 they've been remote. So like we've
Right.
got this remote kind of built in, and we talked about the struggles of actually pulling that in to your company and creating this remote work
Hmm.
environment. As I was listening to that last night, of course,
Hmm.
Greg, I thought about you, and I thought about sales and negotiating
Yeah.
and like talking to people, talking people into things, talking people, getting them to buy things.
Right.
I don't know why that didn't come up in that show. And I'm so glad that that's what we're going to talk about today a little bit here, is because there's this whole remote thing about negotiating. Like when you're negotiating face to face, like I was
Hmm.
just doing some stuff where I'm selling like banners for my kids' sport team, right? Walking into a place and talking to them is a heck of a lot easier because you can read them a little bit easier. You can, than picking up the phone and trying to sell it over the phone, or even, trying to do it on Zoom, I would think.
Right.
So I feel like, does the remote thing, has it changed the way that you negotiate, the way that you try to close deals, like with your media deals that you're doing and all these different things?
Absolutely. When I'm in person, the rapport, the icebreakers, all of that is so much easier because you can kind of see what's going on around you. You can have them walk you through their facility, and that just kind of stimulates conversation and learning about, what they do, what they're proud of. It comes out right when you're in person. When you're doing these Zoom presentations, it is a challenge to kind of get them to open up. There almost is that wall because
Yeah.
you can't shake their hand. You can't have them walk you around. I guess you could, but it's kind of uncomfortable. They'd have to unplug their laptop or something. But it's a lot more challenging. So you have to ask really intelligent questions to get them to open up, to kind of simulate what it would be like in person.
Right.
And you have to kind of build your credibility before they'll open up to you, and that's a little more challenging when it's not in person as well too. So there's just a lot of extra challenges now with people trying to do virtual sales versus in-person sales.
Yeah. I mean, I think I would have had difficulty with that. I mean, I did well when I
Yeah.
was in front of somebody across from them.
Well, you're
And
very likable. So that's one of the great things is when people meet you, they immediately feel a connection and a likability to you. And I think that is a huge advantage when you have that and you can meet people in person because, people gravitate to you, Russ. Like within minutes, people are smiling, laughing. I think it's your improv background also kind of brings people in. those techniques that you learned in doing improv. And, and I kind of have that same sort of vibe, right? People
Totally.
enjoy being around us and that type of thing. So when you're forced out of that, in a sense, it is more challenging.
Right.
It
Right.
comes
So
down to the questions. It really comes down to the questions.
it really does. It
Yeah.
really does. Yeah, definitely. And I guess you've had to alter those over the
Absolutely. Yeah.
pandemic and all the different things that you had to do as you're now doing mostly remote with all of your chats with people. So that's interesting. But also interesting is just the whole topic of negotiation and communication. And that's what we're going to chat about today. So we have not one, but two guests joining us today. We have Chip
Yes.
and we have Adele. They've written a book called Convince Me. That's a cool book right there. They sent us the info to get on our show, and we're like, well, you don't need to convince us. So we'll let you on there. So why don't we start, Adele? Why don't you tell us a little about your background?
Sure. So I am a crisis communication expert. I like to say, we help people get into the news, we help people get out of the news, we help people get the spotlight, and we help people hide when necessary. So, and in crisis communications, a lot of times you have to convince people to do what's right for them at the moment, even though it might be counterintuitive to what they want to do. So that can be.
Mhm.
That can be great, great fun. I know it's great, and one of the things that Chip really has helped, my co-founder of the Convincing Company. He has really helped, create such a high level of emotional intelligence for us during crisis situations, high stakes situations, given his background. And
Adele, tell them how you started out.
Oh, I started out at George Magazine, John F. Kennedy Jr.'s publication.
Wow,
yes. Cool. Yes. And I did meet him. I actually went down an elevator and walked 2 blocks with him. So, I don't know. That was fun. That's cool. I got tickets to his Knicks game. So that was cool too.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So that was fun. But, it was a great place to start. Really interesting intersection between politics and pop culture, which was such a new idea in the late 90s, totally dating myself. But I started out as a journalist, first 5 years of my career as a journalist. Then I went over to the dark side because I had to pay my student loans back. So I worked on Madison Avenue in the .com boom. So it was great timing, launched some major brands, including eBay and 1-800-Flowers.com and Moviephone.com. So some really fun stuff. And then started my own agency. And and I've been working with Chip for about the last 5 years, but I've had my own company for about 18.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Impressive.
Yeah. Now we're going to do a whole show just on the whole Kennedy thing there.
It's fun. Oh my God. It's really cute.
JFK Jr. That's pretty cool.
I've got some good
Chip,
stories.
why don't we hear a little about you?
Yeah, guys. So I was a special agent, hostage negotiator for 22 years in the FBI. I started my career at the Washington field office, where I primarily was working on an espionage squad. So running around trying to find spies and find out what was going on, what kind of information they were looking for. And, also working other violations, drugs, fugitives, white collar crime. I moved to New York to work out there in the New York field office. And that's where I joined and led the hostage negotiation team for the New York field office. So that's me.
Okay.
How do you get into that, Chip? I mean,
exactly.
How does somebody get to be a negotiator and that type of thing?
Yeah. So in the FBI, there are collateral duties after you get, say 5 years under your belt. You're considered kind of a journeyman agent, and you have an ability to seek out what other things that the FBI needs done. So there's scuba, there's SWAT, there's evidence recovery, there's bomb techs, and there's also hostage negotiations. So I was on the crisis negotiation team, and that involved, you have to try out just like everything else. It seems like throughout our lives, guys, we're trying out all the time, right? It's like everything,
Mhm.
it's from meeting a new client or whatever it is, it's a tryout. So you have to go through that. And after you're go through an interview process and the whole shebang, then you're on kind of like a probationary period to decide whether, you know, you're going to gel with the team, you're the kind of person they're looking for. And then after you do that, then you go to the basic school for 40 hours. And if you complete that successfully, you're still in good standing. Then you can go to the Quantico for hostage negotiation intensive training. So that's it. You just raise your hand and say, I'd like to join. And then you go through a process. Yeah.
I'm raising my hand right now. I want to join.
We have a program for that.
Yeah. You know, what's funny is that when we do presentations and workshops and keynotes, is one of the things that we often do is we do like a hostage situation simulation.
Oh.
So we ask volunteers, and we do it in different ways. But one of the ways we do is if it's a short presentation, we'll have two people come up, and we're going to make them the hostage team, right? And so we describe a little bit of the skill set, what it takes, and invariably people say, "So do I get like temporarily sworn in? Is that a thing?"
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And I swear them in. And then I swear them in.
I wonder how the FBI feels about that, Chip. Oh, God.
You know, this is a story that I feel like I've told Greg so many stories. I don't think I've told you this one, Greg, but
Okay.
So there was this neighborhood emergency response team thing for the fire department. And this was back, you know, when I was like, I don't know, in my late teens, early 20s. And I was working at a local community theater, and they needed some volunteers to come in to, you know, basically like play injured. And, you know, they would give you little clues of like, you know, just say your leg hurts and, you know, this, and, you know, you've got a numbness here. And so that the person would have to figure it out, like what's wrong. And they would ask you questions, and you kind of had this thing set in your mind. It's this kind of an improv game for us, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I had so much fun with it. I was like, this is great. And so I did it once. We, you know, did it a second time, and then we had lunch, and then we came back, and I was like, I can't wait. What do I do now? And they're like, you're just gonna play the dead guy. What did I do wrong?
You went a little too far with it, huh, Russ? A little too animated with your injuries, maybe.
I think I was having a little too much fun.
That reminds me of the Seinfeld episode where Kramer gets jaundice, and like he's like trying to pretend to be jaundice, and he like paints his face yellow. That's fantastic. So
that.
Ridiculous.
Oh man. That's I already thought of JF because of the JFK Jr. thing. I thought of a Seinfeld episode there. So
yes, that is a Seinfeld episode. It certainly is.
Exactly. So okay, we've got so much that we can talk about just based on those intros alone. But I do want to get into, first of all, like, you know, I mean, okay, negotiating sometimes is just a lot about convincing people, right? To figure out like what they should be doing, what you want them to do. Let's just get like right into that. What's the steps there? How do you be convincing?
Chip, that's all you. You got to do
the
premise. Still,
Adele's got some such cool stories about this. So one of the things that we say, and this is, you know, again, when I started working with Adele, she spent so much time like interviewing me about the process, what it was that I did, how did I learn it, what were they trying to get to, what were the end results, what were the technique, strategies, and all that. I mean, hundreds of hours, guys, right, to do this. And then she put all that together and figured out what would be, you know, the most interesting portion of these things, the most helpful things for business. And she kind of just did an overlay over it. And then we started talking about, you know, okay, well, what kind of things could we offer as a result of this? We talked about, you know, the unstated narrative. We talked about forensic listening. Just all these things started to come out as she started to feel like, okay, I know in business we do this. I hear you saying you do that in hostage negotiations. And what is the meld here? And it just took off from there. So one of the things that we say when when we're talking to people about this whole idea of negotiation is that, first of all, in a hostage negotiation, I never, ever negotiated with anyone. That was not my job. It says it, right there. It actually says crisis negotiations or hostage negotiations. But actually, my job was to convince, right? Just like you said, right?
Right.
Is to convince that guy in that room that has a gun to somebody's head to put it down and surrender to me. Now, so what he was doing at that point, and what I'm trying to do, is I am trying to get this guy to value what I value, which was life, which was safety, and which was, you know, let's all go home in one piece today. Can we do that?
Right.
And you didn't start out there, right? You don't start out there. You start out with, I want $1 million in a jet. Like, not going to happen, right? But I can't say that.
Right.
We have to work around that. And things like, okay, you want a jet. Where you want to go in that jet? And $1 million, I'm curious, why is it $1 million? And what would you do with the money? And you slowly work the person down to the point where they get to this thinking of, hey, you know, my best bet here is from after talking to this guy is I understand I am not, you know, this is not a thing that I can do on my own. I can't get the government to give me $1 million and a jet. Maybe I can get out of here alive. And that's where we want them to go. So we always say is, all right, you got 7 people in there. Tell you what, kill 3, give me back 4, call it a day. That was not an option. That's never going to happen. So I really had to get into that guy's head. And that's one of the things that had really piqued Adele's interest, is that there is a method here. There is a technique. There's a strategy that was used to develop that. And we did a lot of research in this. We talked to a professor at Columbia University. We talked to a neuroscientist over at Wharton. And we just started putting all this together. And it just became so very cool.
One of the fun things about this, guys, is like, if you think about it, right? Like when you go into any negotiation, meeting, you know, sales opportunity, you never go in and say most of us, what we do is we do the exact wrong thing, right? We probably do what like most people say hostage negotiators do in a movie, which is like, bullhorn, come out with your hands up or you're gonna die, right? It's like, you know,
Grounded.
Right. Right. We can't do that in a meeting, but most of us go into meetings with like, hey, this is my point, this is my price, this is what I'm selling, what do you think? And that's the worst thing you could possibly do, right? And as a journalist, I started my career as a journalist. You know, you start with your most important points first, and then you move your story down. And what actually social science and 40 years of research says is that is the exact wrong way to do it. What you want to do is you want to start with the point of agreement, right? Where do you both agree? And you want to move them down what we call a convincing continuum, and slowly create fear, uncertainty, and doubt in what they believe is true when you first start talking with them. Because there's never going to be a point, although all of us wish this would happen. I mean, like wildest dreams, right? Where you go into a meeting and maybe it's a point you're arguing with someone else. You know, the person just throws up their hands and they're like, "You're 100% right. I never thought of it that way. God, you're amazing." and like, I'm so wrong. Thank you so much for showing me the way. That's not how it works, right? So it's your job to move them down a convincing continuum. And you have to have a lot of discipline, because most of us want to make our strongest point, right? We want to start with our saga of righteousness and like, here's why I'm right. Here's all the reasons why I'm right. And that does nothing but make the person dig their heels in further. So what you want to do is challenge their certainty, their knowledge about a certain topic, the topic you're talking about, and then move them down fear, uncertainty, and doubt, FUD, and then stop at what we call the convincing cliffhanger. And the reason why you want to do this is you want to direct them to information that will make them change their mind about the topic you're presenting. Because let's face it, we don't change our mind because someone tells us to. We change our mind because we looked it up and we found something interesting that confirmed what maybe, our belief was. And this works so well And it's a technique really so many companies use and use really well, especially entertainment companies. Russ, I know you don't have a background in entertainment. A perfect example of this is Netflix. Think about how Netflix gets you to sit on your couch for like 6 hours and binge watch a show. It's because they give you just enough information for what the next show is
Right.
going to be, right?
Right.
And you dig in. You're like, okay, what is my hypothesis, right? Is this what the next episode is going to be, right? And I mean, some of those Netflix shows aren't even that good, but they've got you captivated, right? Yeah. So
It's those teasers, right? It's those teasers always get you, and it works on me every time. So, you know what? When I listen to both of you and your backgrounds, it seems like both of you are really good at investigating, right? And you know, as a journalist with the FBI, you're always like looking for information, or information gathering, and then with that, you're using that information to kind of get whoever you're talking to, whether it's a negotiation or whether it's an interview, kind of to open up and give you the points that you can use. And I was just wondering, do you build that into the techniques that you teach?
Yeah.
absolutely. Chip is so good at this. Yeah.
Well, as is Adele, but what we came to when we again started talking about this and developing our programs was this whole idea of forensic listening, which is so much of what you just talked about, Greg, is that it's an investigative process. And what we say is that words leave clues.
Mm-hmm.
And if we examine our conversations that we've already had with somebody, we go back and we think about various things and we take note of it in light of this idea of forensic listening, you're going to get a better understanding of that person. Here's what we mean. What we say, and this is the idea of a different kind of way of taking notes. We implement this at recently taught this at an international bank, and they're going to use it throughout the company. And it's like this. You take a piece of paper, divide it up into 4 quadrants, right? And one quadrant, you have the body positioning of the person. Another quadrant is the emotion of the person. A third quadrant is the themes being developed by that person. And the fourth is their voice, their pitch, tone, and cadence. Now, what these things tell you individually are fantastic, but when you bring them together, it develops a kind of a picture of this person that perhaps is such a full and robust way of understanding them that you're going to get so much better understanding of them than perhaps, anyone else in their business life, maybe even their personal life as a result of this. So let's take, for example, the theme development quadrant. And what you're doing there, let's say you're in a meeting and the person, whoever is conducting it, they're talking on a specific subject. Let's say it's sales development. You're like, okay, yeah, I get that. And what you realize is that as they're talking, really what they're centering in on is more about client relationships. I'm like, okay. In fact, so whereas that's a component of it, but they're really driving home client relationships, and they want but the title of the meeting, that essentially what it was about was this whole other idea. But you're going to write that down. You're like, that's interesting. I'm going to write. And then the emotion. And when you combine that emotion when they started talking about client relationships, voice goes up. But when they're talking about other things that are really meant, right, it's going down, right? Mm-hmm. And the other is body positioning. And we differentiate that, guys, from body language. And here's why. Because we say that we're not static, right? You don't just put us in a pose and we stay there. And that's kind of our attitude the whole meeting. We move. We're constantly moving and presenting how we are feeling inside to the outside world. And so if you take note of that, like say, if I'm talking and my face might be calm, but you see me, balling and unballing my hands, there's some tension going on there, and I better pay attention to that. Something's going on inside. And the other is their voice, right? Their pitch, tone, and cadence. What is that about, and why are they going up in certain other aspects of what's happening, and of course the emotion that's present. what is it that they're excited about? What are they kind of deflated on? Those kind of things. And if you group all those together, this is the investigative part you were alluding to, Greg, is that now you've got a full picture of this person. And imagine this, you take a piece of that and that thing that perhaps wasn't the stated purpose of that meeting, or that client was telling you a story and it was an outlier of why you guys were talking in the first place. But you write that down and you work that in through the relationship. Let's say 2 weeks, a month later, and you raise something that was important to them because the notes you took.
Yeah.
Imagine how that makes the other person feel. I don't know about you guys. I can count on like one hand with 3 fingers how many times that's happened to me when someone came back to me and said, that thing you said really made a difference to me. And here's why, right? Yeah. But that's another thing that we call targeted validation. And all these things work together to understand people better.
How does that change? So in the open, we were talking about how Greg is now doing some, more remote. I'm doing, ton of remote meetings. I'm actually getting back to some office stuff where I'm actually meeting people face to face. It's amazing. But
so much better.
Over Zoom, how much does that change, and how much more difficult is that to do that?
Yeah. And Adele, I'll just say this and I'll let Adele take it. The thing about Zoom is that, and again, through Adele's interviewing of me, is that we realized that over 98% of what I did as a hostage negotiator was over a phone, right? I never got a eye contact with somebody else, who was in crisis. I never had a line of sight on that individual, very rarely. So when everything I was done was through voice. And so I had to communicate, my calmness. I had to communicate my confidence that this is going to result peacefully. All that had to be resonated. And then I'm picking up from him what he's feeling as a result of, again, that voice. Now, Zoom, in a lot of ways, is like a fire hose of information. Sometimes it's too much because you can get distracted on the wrong things and not focus in on what that person's trying to say and what they're not saying. And so a lot of times, and I know you guys are, we're talking about like, how do you establish that connection, that rapport on a Zoom when it's so much easier when you're going to their plant, you're looking around, you're walking into their office and you've got things to sell, you're interacting, right? This is different. But one of the things that we advocate for people, and this might be a good thing for your listeners to adopt, is vulnerability, is to say a little bit of something about yourself that doesn't, step over the line into ick, but, it could be something that's self-deprecating of like, how you might be feeling about, a certain aspect that you are talking about with your client. Like, hey, I'm really good with computers. I suck with cars and I just can't figure out what's going on. These kind of things, little vulnerabilities lead to an emotional connection with another person. And emotional connections are shortcuts to establishing a bonded relationship. Yeah. And if we can do that in an authentic way, we get so much closer to an understanding of what that person is about. Adele, I know you've.
Yeah, no. I think he's right. Like he said in a business Bloomberg piece, right? That like it's a fire hose of information on Zoom. It's like I've got a picture over here. It's opposite. I've got a picture of my daughter like biting her hands with a crisis phone because I think it was so cute. She's super little, right? In this picture, it was just perfect timing. But I can tell a story about that picture. It's like I have that picture up for a reason, right? I have Einstein in the background for a reason, right? Because I'm so smart. No, I'm kidding. My point is that like when you look at someone's background, like Greg, I see, hey, you know what? You don't have much. What's happening? Where are you? Are you not in your regular place? It's like, I can ask questions, with you, Russ. It's like, hey, I can see, you have a cool gaming chair. That's a really neat chair. Like, tell me more about that. I mean, like, right, just taking an interest in people and what's going on in their background. So many of us don't do it because we're on Zoom constantly, or at so many hours of the day that we're not really digging into the environment, and the environment sometimes says a lot. If the background's blurred, why is it blurred? Like, there's some interesting data in that.
There's anything wrong with that.
Right. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but yeah, I mean, but there's some interesting data you could get from that. Like, why are they blurring it, or where are they? Like, it's just these are questions you sort of just have to ask yourself, and it gives you a sense of who someone is. Now, one of the things I just want to say, because this freaked me out when Chip and I first started working together, I was always thinking he was analyzing me. I'm like, oh my God, like what do you do? What do you do to analyze someone? Like, how do you read people? Like, what do you do? And he had what I think is one of the best explanations for how to do this. And we have this in our book, but Chip, can you kind of explain how you do it? Like the totality of things. It's not,
Yeah. It's often like, we say, and when we hear this, and again, there's a lot of people out there advocating about body language and so forth, and they're making their livelihood off that, and certainly not taking away from that. But what I
so maybe a little
we say is that, we've all heard it. Well, he's sitting with his arms folded. That means he might be defensive. He's disengaged, right? Well, sometimes I just like to sit with my arms folded, and it has nothing to do with what.
Or sometimes it's just cold in the room, and you try to keep it warm. Right? I mean, yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
No, right?
Right.
And that's the thing. And that okay, I'm talking to that person. Their eyes are going up and to the left. Deception, right? No, it probably isn't that. So what we say is that you take into account the totality of what that person is expressing in front of you. Anxiety can come out in many forms, and fear can come out in leakage in many different ways. Resistance, so one of the things that I'm going to ask Adele to tell a story about when she was working with a client that was doing some interesting things with her body positioning. But one of the things we talk about is the engagement that the person is showing you. And so we've all done this, and it's happened to me too many times to talk about. But at a party, you're talking to somebody, and they're looking for the interesting person to talk to. They're looking around who is better on the A list than you are. And so, that's obnoxious. But you also get clues of people when they're trying to disengage from you. Their head might swivel away, and they might be looking at other things, or all of a sudden they're checking their phone a little bit more than they did originally, right? All little signs to that you should clue in on. And I'll ask Adele to talk about the blading situation.
Yeah, so I had a crisis communication client, and I went into their office, and I was asking them. They called us in because they were experiencing something super negative. There was an investigation going on. Like there were things happening that they didn't want to get out to the public, and that sometimes occurs, and we advise on that. Every time I asked the COO a question about a particular thing, she would turn her back to me, like literally physically turn her back to me. And I'm like, so weird. She just did not answer. She would answer the question, but it was just physically, like, she clearly avoided that. Every time I hit that subject, she would move her body away. And I find that, like, when you start to look for body positioning, it actually shows up a lot more than you think, like people do these subtle things that if you're paying attention and you have a baseline for how people typically react in certain situations. Like, I understand that when we walk into a crisis situation, people are nervous, right? So we know baseline, they're going to be nervous. They're going to move around a lot. They're going to fidget. People are nervous when they first come to us and they're asking for help. But her body turning was so unusual that I came back from the meeting and I called Chip up and I was like, "What was this?" And he explained that it was bleeding, and it's something that people do when they're uncomfortable with a certain situation. They bleed. They tilt their body in certain directions. So, getting a baseline for how someone is, addressing that, thinking about that, and then making notes of it, right? Like the forensic note taking stuff. it's going to be just other level. Like, have you guys ever had somebody refer back to a meeting that you had where you said something? I mean, it's unusual, but it's great, right?
Yeah. I mean, at least you're memorable, right? I mean, that's one of the things that I look for in salespeople. It's like, try to be memorable for a good reason. Don't be memorable for a good reason. Be memorable for a good reason. You know, and everything that you guys just talked about really reminds me of playing poker. Like, I love playing poker. And, you know, there's all these different tells, but you do have to take totality of the situation. It's not just the physical tells, but how much are they betting? Did they do something similar earlier in the session that you're playing against? Do you play against this person for years, or is this the first time? Right? It's the totality of the situation that you really need to understand. And trust me, I'm never playing poker with either one of you two.
He's in Vegas. He's trying to get tips, Chip. He's like, so when you're at a blackjack table and you have this cards, like, what do you do? I mean, I don't know who might need that, but I might need that like in the next hour.
Right. I mean, you know, just saying.
I'm curious, like, what type of crises do companies bring you in on that you work with? And you know, you have a training program, right, that you just started. Like, talk a little bit about that and how it gets companies prepared so maybe they avoid crisis, or when they're in the crisis, how to deal with it.
Chip, do you want to go first?
No, please.
Okay, so when you think about crisis communications, it's an odd thing because a lot of people don't have experience with it, or if they do, it's one of those things they want to choose to forget, right? But essentially, it could be anything from you say something wrong and you need to apologize for it if you're an executive, or you have infighting either internally or externally. It could be board members who are questioning maybe your leadership and your judgment. It could be you said something wrong in the media, and the media are then going to follow up with lots of aggressive questions on what you said, why you said it. I mean, you know, the CEO of Kellogg's just recently said that people should eat cereal for dinner. And he is catching a lot of grief about that, right? Like, so, I mean, like, people are like, you're telling poor people, multimillionaire man, CEO, you're telling poor people they should eat cereal for dinner. Like, it just came off the wrong way. And I bet when he talked to his communication person, and this is something we hear so often, Greg and Russ, when he talked to his communication people, he's like, I don't understand. I've been a great executive for 25 years. I've been amazing. I've been so good at Kellogg for 25 years. I say one thing about cereal and the internet's losing their mind. I mean, like, and he will probably spend what, Chip, like how many hours just on that point alone, right? God. And, you know, and so part of our job is to sort of pull people out of the pity party they're throwing for themselves, or what we call the fairness fallacy, and get them on task to do what they have to do to fix their reputational problem that can cost sometimes companies millions, right? They might spin something wrong, or they might leave a detail out that, you know, maybe makes the public go, I kind of would have wanted that detail. That would have changed my mind about something. I wouldn't have bought that, or, right? And so our job is really to interpret, how is the public going to react to your apology, to your fix, to the mitigation you're providing either for yourself or for your company? And that requires, you know, some real nuance in how people are going to react and feel. And this is where Chip's hostage negotiation background and, you know, investigative background really helps in getting the executive to do what we want them to do. I mean, before Chip, BC, you know, I would go in and I would say, do these 5 things immediately. I don't really want to hear about your whining about the fairness. Like, we're losing time. Like, let's go. Come on. Yeah. And then Chip came on, and Chip, I'll have you jump in just in like what you do for executives in this.
Yeah. It's one of the things it's difficult, right? A lot of the executives we deal with are men, and it's hard for them to admit that they've made a misstep, right? And then more importantly, it's hard for them to get them to do the corrective action that Adele knows exactly what to do. And she knows it within a hot 5 seconds of the 7 things they got to do now to start to course correct, right? and they're still in the fairness fallacy, or they're still, circling the wagons, and they, let's not talk, don't do it. And Adele's like, no, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. And they're like, well, no, I don't know if we should do that. And so my job in that is to get them to have a kind of a sober reflection of where they are right now, and also to mitigate. It was like, hey, you're not the first person that's had this problem, right? It's a problem with humankind. So just know that, and let's try to solve this as quickly as we can. All these things, when you identify it and you see it. But one of the things that's amazing to me when I moved from crime fighting to working with Adele was how different female executives are from male. And one of the main things is the idea of dealing with the concept of fear. I'm used to it in the FBI, right? We're constantly dealing with people that were, in a crisis, that were in fear mode, that were, dangerous people. And for a man to talk about, we come in and say, all right, what's the biggest fear you've got here? What's the biggest fear running your company? They're like, fear. You're in the wrong room, son. That might be 3 doors down. And all right,
they're in total denial about anything you did.
I got to change the language.
Yeah.
And once I say, all right, what's the stress level like here? Oh, stress. Talk all day about that, right? So a lot of times women executives will get to solve quicker because they're not impeded by a lot of the crap thinking that male executives have going on in their head.
And they're much more likely to own up to a mistake quicker.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
all day.
It's just like, everything is my fault. It's like, okay, calm down. We're not going to make everything your fault, but maybe one thing, but not everything. Yeah.
Interesting. What I want to, okay. So first of all, the two of you working together, being these great negotiators and being these great, people that can convince another person. Chip, when you've got an idea, and Adele, when you don't believe in it, what do you guys do? I mean, you guys, how do you work that out? Because you're both great.
That's all you, Chip. You answer that question first.
I am older, right? And I like to think I have wisdom. Wisdom dictates that I listen to what Adele says, and that really helps. That really helps. No,
all I'm hearing is Adele laughing right now.
She has amazing business acumen. No, we have
we don't disagree on much.
Yeah, we do, and we hugely respect each other, our disciplines, our backgrounds, what we did, and so it really is a non-issue for us. I know for some people in partnerships that it's a big thing. They have a lot of rivalry and ego involved. That's just not in play for us. So
yeah, I don't think we have that because we both have such disparate backgrounds, but then also they come together in the same way, and I just think it's a matter of respect. Yeah, I think. Yeah. Right. I mean, like you guys working together, right? Like,
yeah,
I'm sure.
I can't think of a disagreement in a while. And when we do, we usually just oh, okay, well, let's not do that.
Over
yeah, exactly. That's what we do too.
Go for dinner or something like that.
Yeah, work it out over tacos or burritos or something.
Why did you double up that Chip?
Sort of have a I don't know. This is, I guess, is the part B to that, or the second part to that question. There is. Okay, so Greg and I, basically with what we do, we're on the same level, right? You two you're on the same level. Sometimes there's people that are working with you or working for you that may not exactly get the business side of something. Like somebody on your team may need that convincing. And they're hearing it okay, the Kellogg's guy, right? He's on this high level of got this huge income, and he's saying the cereal comment. He may think that's perfectly fine, but it could be the same sort of thing in your team. Let's say you're trying to convince your team to do something. Let's say we'll pick something innocuous, adopt software. You want them to do this particular thing. You're going to use this new software, and that's what you want them to do. But you want to try to convince them to do that, to get their buy-in on that.
You want their
They're at a
buy-in.
different level. Like,
Right.
so I've sort of created this complex situation. How do you handle that?
Oh, sure. So one of the things we talk about, which I think is really interesting, and we haven't really talked about this on a podcast, but Chip, I'd love for you to dive into it. One of the things that's like a misnomer about hostage negotiation or like FBI agents is this idea that like there's this one sung hero, right? Like there's this one hero that comes in and saves the day. And in actuality, it is a team-based approach, right? Any kind of like arrest, mission, investigation, and I'm sorry if I'm using the wrong terms here, Chip, is that it's a team-based approach because there's a bunch of specialists who have been trained in that discipline, right? And I think that if you make your team feel like, or a member of your team, if you make them feel like a specialist in something, and you can do this through training, and then they come back and then they teach the team that little specialization, it's going to create so much more of a better team dynamic for your company. And so if you run into a problem and this person needs to adopt something, you'd be like, hey, I know this is something you're not comfortable with. Could you go research for this for us? Could you specialize in this for our team so that you can come back and help us all understand what you're having trouble understanding? Just coming at it from a specialization standpoint, I think can be incredibly empowering to certain members of your team. Like no matter where you are in your career journey, you're a specialist at something. There's something you know more than someone else in the team. And having respect for your team, that they have that knowledge, I think will make everyone want to pitch in more. They'll feel like they're being heard. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, I definitely think the inclusiveness and giving them strength and having a voice, right? I think a lot of people, when they're talking to their managers and they feel like, you won't listen to me. Like I can tell you everything and you're not going to listen to me. You're just going to do what you want to do anyway. That is so harmful for a company and to have that culture. So whenever we talk to leaders within an organization, whether it's management or CEOs or so on, we say empower your team. I mean, if you empower them, you're going to be way more successful than if you're trying to make all the decisions yourself and just have them as worker bees.
Yeah.
Well, I think, like the whole thinking about like the status thing, right? Like, oh, this person's in a different status than me, or that person. Like when you can get past that and make people sort of like not think about that in the way of like within your company or within your organization, if you're like, you know what, we're all just people. We're all trying to get this job done. We're all equals here in many ways. Now, of course, there's management decisions, problems.
Well, and people feel good if they feel like they're contributing.
Exactly. Yeah. And I feel like, like Greg has always done a great job of that, of like empowering people that he's managing to actually, not just feel like they're contributing, but to be like, like do that, to make that happen. And it's like, it's something that, I don't know. I mean, it's not an easy thing that you learn right away. Like I'm sure I screwed that up early on in my
majorly.
career,
I did too. Oh my gosh, I was such a bad manager. Yeah, in the first, like, especially when I was like in New York and there was so much pressure on me, and I had celebrities who were like, "Get me this," and it's like I had this team of little minions who had to help me get that, and I'm like, "Get it, get it quickly," like Michael Strahan is right behind me and like, I need you to do this now. And like, that kind of level of pressure. Right. And so that wasn't great. So
I think like the devil wears Prada, right? I think
it kind of was like that. Yeah, no, it definitely was like that. Right. And so one of the things, that we write about in the book is this idea of validation, right? Everyone needs to be validated. They need to be validated for their specialization, why they're bringing something new to the table, and everyone has it. And I actually, I don't know, maybe this is like an old school, old fashioned way of thinking, but I don't think hierarchy in a company is all that bad. I mean, some people are in higher roles because they know more and they contribute more. And I don't think creating hierarchy is bad if you validate people's expertise. And if you give people specialization throughout their journey up, I think hierarchy actually works okay. You don't want to be like, obviously you don't want to be like overlording people, but I don't think it's so bad for them to realize that, hey, maybe someone else is in charge. I think companies get that wrong when they go too flat. So I don't know. That's my controversial thing I'll say. But yeah, I think validation is really, really important.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's, that doesn't need to be done with money. That doesn't need to be done with, like, oh, you've got a better title. It's the validation. I one of the interviews that we did, I'm forgetting the guy's name now, but we talked about this leadership thing, about how he's managing so many people, and he just walks around, talks with them every day, has these conversations with them, and just is like so approachable and so there that's the thing that's giving people validation on what they're doing. And he actually listens and understands. It's sort of like what you're saying earlier. He remembers what he's talking to, or what he's talked about to these people, and who he's talking to. Like, it's a great thing. Like, when you can do that. It's tough when you've got about 100 people or whatever, but
you can still do it though.
Databases, but it's tough to do that. But when you've got a small team doing that, is such a benefit. Like feeling approachable, and actually like being there. It's fantastic when you can do that. You guys have taught us a lot here. We've talked about a lot. As I said at the beginning of the show, I feel like this could be like one of our, we could go 10 hours with you guys.
Russ,
so
many people thank
you.
Before we wrap up, I have a question for Chip that I've been dying.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's right. That's right. We got to go to the big question here.
I've been kind of like Netflix. We teased it, right? So now we gotta pay it off here on the finale. I watch a lot of Netflix. I watch a lot of movies. I'm a big, Money Heist, where I watch that show. There's hostages. There's negotiations. There's so many different movies, television shows about this. There's a lot of information out there on how negotiators do their job. If I'm going to commit a crime, don't I watch those movies and understand what they're trying to do to me? I mean, come on, people. Do your research.
They're not going to give you a play.
I love how Greg was like, so even like, okay, and I'm watching the show Netflix, and I'm watching this.
Like,
if I'm gonna commit a crime,
he's trying to get to the point. He's trying to isolate the problem. He's trying to do. I mean, I know the roadmap.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what's interesting, and this is a great point, because we.
This is true in our training too. Yeah.
Exactly. Is that the techniques and the strategies that we have in this book, and that I've learned in the FBI, and Adele's learned, and that we join together and have this like offering that we teach. It's interesting is that this stuff works on us. Here's what I mean. So, as a highly trained FBI hostage negotiator, right? On the team, and things are tense, and I'm talking to a member of like, say, the overall command and control in the bureau, and they're coming in, they're telling us what to do, what saying is, and I'm losing my mind, right? I'm gonna, and so there's a guy though that's on my team next to me. He's going, "Hey, Chip, I understand that's really frustrating for you, and God, if I was in that position, man, I lost my mind too, and I get it." And so, and I'm like, yeah, and I'm like, and all of a sudden I'm calming down. I'm like, wait a minute. See, the technique works. The strategies work, and it's because you're dealing with a human dynamic emotion. You are thrust into a crisis situation, or a heightened business meeting, or whatever it is, and these things actually work. They work so well because it's authentic, it's real, and it will continue to work on us. Adele uses it on me. It's true.
And Greg, the other thing is, like, those shows are so convenient because they like neatly wrap everything up in the end, right? It's always like, well, this just happened in this way, in this order, and that just makes total sense. And when you're dealing with high stress situations, it's not the same order, right? It's like you come to expect order in what you're watching with shows. And it's not the same in a crisis situation because you have emotion, you have, people like unfolding and unraveling in a way that's surprising. Like, like we could be with a client and we're handling a crisis and everything's good, right? Like neat in a bow. It's like, they're going to listen to us. It's going to work. Woo-hoo. Maybe it's different this time. And then like an hour and a half later, they call up and they're like, damn it, I picked up the phone and sent that email anyway, and it wasn't good. And we're just like, what happened? Like, we had a plan. What'd you do? And they were like, well, I felt bad, and this person made me feel bad. And so like the best laid plans, right? I mean, like, it's just when you are dealing with human emotion, it's not easy to predict. Like these shows, right? The shows make it like, oh yeah, of course they're going to do that. It's like, no, in real life, people do crazy things, right, Chip? I mean,
yeah. It's an up and down thing, right? And that's the thing that we teach in hostage negotiation is that your emotions have to be in check because you've got to get that other person to start to de-escalate. And the other thing is that, when they start to skyrocket, even though you've done your best, right? Your client, is great. Everything's in the pocket. And all of a sudden they call up and they're pissed off because, one of your sales team said the wrong thing. Like, what happened? We were just right there. Well, that's when you have to really trust the process. And the thing is to trust the process and get to the point where you really interact more with the process than you do with the expectation of what that person is giving you.
Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I show up and I'm so thirsty that I've got to get all the cues from this person, all the right things, and I'm hanging on every word. And when they start to nosedive, I'm going to nosedive. No, we can't do that. Right. We have to continue to stay professional, to stay in the lane, to trust in the technique and the tactics. And eventually that person's going to come around. Please.
Can I just add one thing? Just the one thing is like our training so good, it's criminal, enables people to like have crisis experiences, meaning they're role playing with hostage takers. They're having the actual experience. And what this does, and and what we've experienced as like crisis communication experts, and like obviously Chip in more life and death situations. But for me, it's like I've made some of the crisis decisions hundreds of times, and my clients are making them for the first time. And so if you come to our training, essentially you're going to build up neural pathways of being able to, how do I deal under stress? Know yourself. What you think you're going to be like and what you're actually like are usually two totally different things. So, try it out, test it out. It really is invaluable to know how you're going to react in high stress situations.
See, look at how good you guys are. You answered Greg's question, and then you got right to the training thing that I was going to ask you about. So tell us more. If somebody wanted to take that training, how does one sign up?
Yeah, so you go to our website, trainingsogood.com, and sign up and come to one of our trainings. We'd love to have your listeners, and Greg and Russ, come to one of our trainings. We'd love to have you.
Is that an in-person training or is it an online training?
We have in-person options and we have online options. The online option and the in-person option both send clues to your phone, and you're like literally solving a mystery and a case as you are learning the techniques and the strategies that apply to business. It's not just like watching, hours and hours of Law and Order for the sake of, the cha-ching at the end of each episode, but it's about getting the business benefit out of it. What is situational awareness? How do you use forensic listening? All that kind of stuff.
Nice. And then the book as well. We've got that out there. Let's mention that. Available everywhere, I'm assuming.
Everywhere, yeah. Barnes and Noble, Amazon.com. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
I the only other question that I've got to ask, because I know my wife will want the answer. JFK Jr. just as good looking in person or better?
I mean, I
Putting you on the spot with that one.
no, yeah. I'm like, I'm starting a little.
Tell him, Adele.
Sweating. He's gorgeous. Yeah, I'm sorry. Like he was absolutely. He was so good looking that I would sit in meetings with him, and I'm like looking for flaws. Like maybe he has big pores, or like, like his arms are just too long for his body, or like there was just
something. Give me something.
Yeah. Nothing. Nothing. He was perfect. Really, really, and he was really super nice and just. He was so interesting when you first met him because, and we have this in the book, and I think it's such a fascinating story in that he set up. He knew that people walked in with an expectation of who he was based on everything pop culture said up to that date, right? Of who he was, and instead of going, I hate that people are going to think of me like this. I hate that I'm going to walk into a situation like this. He would say, like, listen, you have these preconceived notions. I know you do. And he would have his admin, his executive assistant go, don't call him John. Don't refer to this. Don't refer to that. He's not like this. He doesn't want to seem like a person who's not in the room. If you have an idea and you need his perspective on something, you need to ask him like you would ask anyone else. And they set up this expectation that was so surprising because, like, what am I, like a lowly editorial assistant? But they took the time to go, this is how he wants to be treated. Treat him this way. And I think if you're thinking about how to be convincing and how to be influential and persuasive in your own business, it's like set up those expectations for people. How do you want to be treated? How do you want other people to view you? I mean, yes, he's a celebrity and we had all those preconceived notions, but people have preconceived notions about you and your position too. And thinking about those and maybe getting them out of the way up front, hugely valuable for being more persuasive.
Nice.
Yeah.
I like that.
Nice. Okay. Well, we need to do this again with the two of you because this was so much fun and so much information here. Like we got the like little topics of stuff we could talk about. I'm like, we're just going to talk because there's so much that the two of you can cover. So definitely do check out the book, Convince Me. We'll put a link in the description. Check out the trainings. We'll get you a link for that too in the description. And you got a small taste of what it's like to work with them. So definitely please do check the book out and check out the trainings. Thank you both so much for joining us today. This was fantastic.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for listening, subscribing, and reviewing DIY for Business. The subjects that we cover on the podcast are selected with the goal of helping your business grow, and all of the information provided is opinion-based, and you might want to consult a professional to discuss your exact business situation. Greg and I, we want your company to succeed, and we're happy to take your questions. We would also love to hear your suggestions for future episodes, or if there's an area where you need some solid business advice or help, let us know. Maybe we could build a whole show around it. Like, that would be so much fun to do. And we've done it in the past. We'll do it again. So reach out to us. Visit our website, DIYforbusinesspodcast.com. Greg let me know one of the uncomfortable things was that I've been saying that wrong. I said DIYforbusiness.com a couple episodes ago. And oopsie, it's DIYforbusinesspodcast.com. And the link is in the
easy to
description.
mess up.
Yeah. It's easy, right? I mean, come on. That other one's available. So I'm going to try to get it. We'll see what happens there. Maybe it'll make myself right in those previous episodes. Again, we thank you for listening and subscribing to DIY for Business, where you are not alone.